So, Grandpa, I was going to ask you too. You talked about the 100-pound bombs that were on your ship.
Mm-hmm.
Now, approximately how many of those did one of the gunships carry? Like 100 or 50 or 20? I mean, any ballpark? 'Cause, I mean, we've seen the footage of them just falling out of the planes, out of the bomb bay doors. But and were they long and skinny or short and fat?
No, they were, as I remember, and
right.
Really, it seems to me they were maybe about so long and about this big around.
Okay.
And as far as how many were on in a load, I really don't know. The 500, what were the big ones? They were 500 pounders, I think, and we carried 5 of them. I think that's what they were. But whatever this fellow had on his plane, probably the same load that we had. But they went through the wing, and they took out all the controls then in the process, and they went down through the fuselage, so that one went through our bomb bay. I mean, it came through the roof of the plane and through the bomb bay, so it took out the catwalk that permitted us to go from one end of the plane to the other. That was gone. And we don't know what damage it did in the back part. We don't know really what happened back there because there was nobody left to tell us. Our wingman, who was stacked lower than we were, when they hit him, they had armed themselves. Each one of these bombs had a little propeller on the nose that as it fell through the air, the wind would cause that little propeller to unwind and fall off. And when it was gone, then the bomb was armed. The pin in the nose of it would be activated when it hit something and would then blow up. They hadn't armed themselves when they went through us, was why we lucked out. Our wingman, who was stacked lower than us, they had armed by the time they hit him. And so, I mean, at the same time we're getting hit, he's getting hit, but he's blowing up. And nobody got out of that plane. It blew up in the air. So, as it became apparent immediately that we were not going to go any further, that there were no controls, the pilot on the intercom to us in the front said that, we were not going. There was no controls. The co-pilot, I know, thought that he could fly the plane with the autopilot. Well, that didn't work either because there were no controls. The surfaces that you used to fly the plane with were inoperative, and so there was nothing going on. I unhooked my oxygen, and I went right behind the bulkhead that designated the front of the plane. Right in back of that was a door that dropped out. It wasn't quite on the bottom of the plane. It was more a little bit on the side, but it was still basically down. And so I was there, and my flight engineer, the top gunner, had come down there also with me, and we tried to get that door open. Well, the air on the outside was keeping it closed. We couldn't get the thing to flap open because it opened forward. And so by then my bombardier had picked up a walk-around oxygen bottle and hooked that up. He was carrying that, and he had hooked that to his mask. And so he was all right. He wasn't in any hurry. The engineer and myself were without oxygen. We're at 26,000 feet. And so we're trying to get that doggone door open. And finally I stood on the door, and Rusty and I each were pulling the pins on the hinges. There are 2 hinges, and we each were pulling on the pins to pull them out of the hinge. And all of a sudden we did, and the door went, and so did I. And so I'm falling and looking back up at the plane, and finally I see somebody else come out where I had just come out, and then I saw somebody come out on the tail, hooked up his parachute was hooked up at the top of the canopy, was hooked on the tail assembly somewhere, and he was out at the end of that, just spinning like a top. And it turned out, I'm quite sure that was my bombardier. The pilot, after arguing with the co-pilot about the inability to fly the plane, he finally told the co-pilot he was going to go and the co-pilot could do what he wanted. And so Ripstein went out through the bomb bay doors, which were wide open. He just jumped out, and the co-pilot never did leave. He stayed with the plane. And so I landed. I didn't open my chute because there were still a lot of B-17s coming behind us. They were dropping bombs, and so I just laid and watched what was going on, figuring that this is terrible. All the rest of my group is all going back home, and here I am going down into Germany. Can't be, but it was. And finally, I looked over my shoulder, looked over sideways, and I saw the steeple of a church. And I thought, this is getting awful close. And I pulled my chute and opened up. And I was on the ground in just a very short time then. But I was picked up by two Germans. One was a Luftwaffe, a German Air Force private, and the other was a sailor on the Merchant Marine. And they were both armed, and of course I wasn't. And so when they came around the corner of the building, I landed in the back of a building in an alleyway, and so they came cautiously around with their guns, and I've got nothing. So they took me into a bomb shelter then, down the street someplace, and we walked in, and there was a table that's near the entrance with a couple of officials sitting there, and back in this building I could see there were a lot of people back there. And we walked in, and of course I'm in flying gear, and I could hear the mumble, the murmur go back through the crowd as I was identified, and all of a sudden these two fellows grabbed me by the arms and wheeled me around, and out we ran. And I'm sure that they probably saved my life, because I think that crowd would have killed me had we stayed there much longer. We wound up in the Gestapo headquarters in Kiel, down about 3 flights down underground, where they had a little jail, and that's where I spent the rest of the air raid. Then was down in that jail. After the raid was over, then they came and got me and brought me up and put me in a what's the big German manufacturer? Mercedes. Yeah. And this was the kind that you see in the movies all the time. It was a big 4-door convertible, and the top is down, and I'm in the back seat with a guard, and there's a driver and a guard in front, and we go out a short ways in the country, and we pick up my pilot. He had pulled his chute earlier than I had, and so he had drifted further out of town. And so the two of us then were taken back, and we were taken back to this little seaplane base, because we're on the water there at Kiel, and put in their little jail. And sometime later in that evening or afternoon, in comes the flight engineer. He had drifted out of town quite a ways, and he'd been just brought in. So the three of us were there in the jail in Kiel, and we were held there then for a couple of days, and then we were taken to the railroad station in Kiel, and we were put aboard a train there. And at that point, it was just the pilot and myself. I don't know where the flight engineer had disappeared to, but he'd gone a different route, though, because he was an enlisted man and we were officers. And so he was headed someplace else. Well, the two of us then, there were 2 guards with us, and we went to Frankfurt, Germany, and at the railroad station there, we were offloaded, and we were just walked off a little ways, and our 2 guards were there waiting. We were waiting for a truck. We didn't know what was going on. We were waiting for a truck to come and get us. In the meanwhile, though, a civilian walked up to me and in good English said, "You're fighting on the wrong side." Meaning because the Russians were then the big enemy of the Germans too. And he felt that obviously that the Allies should be on the German side fighting the Russians. He might have been right too, but we finally got picked up by a truck and taken to a interrogation center where I spent about 12 days, I think. And while I was there, the reason I was held there so long was because they knew from the identification on the tail of our plane, which was a Triangle G, that I was from the group that had the new bomb sights in it. And so that they didn't know that I was not in their right squadron, but it took some little while before they finally got that straightened out, and then I was handled like a regular prisoner. But the amazing thing to me, though, was that at the last time when I was let go, or not let go, but when I was put aboard the train to go to the camp, I was taken into another building where there was a young German officer who spoke excellent English, and he had a binder on his desk with the heading on it was 305th, which was my bomb group, and it was divided up into four portions, and one of them was labeled the 364th, and he opens up to that, and page after page, and he's got all these people, and finally he's got a page of me.